Chapter 23, Paragraph Gimel. Page 682 in the Hebrew, 683 in the English. So it says that God spoke to Moshe and told him to speak to the Bnei Yisrael and tell them that these are the Moadei Hashem. These are the appointed times, Asher Tikru'u Osam, that you shall declare Mikra'ei Kodesh, as holy days of assembly. Now, what does it mean that you shall declare them? We know that Shabbos, the Gemara says, is Kviya V'Kaima, it's fixed. The cycle of 6 days, and then Shabbos, goes all the way back to the creation of the world. So there's no need to declare Shabbos. Shabbos is Shabbos. When Shabbos comes, it's Shabbos. We know that the Jewish calendar is ideally fixed by the Jewish court. In other words, in the way the system is supposed to work, on a monthly basis, based on observation of the moon, the court declares a given day to be Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month, and then the holidays, which have dates, the 15th of Nisan, the 15th of Tishrei, really are based on that declaration. So it's really the Jewish people, through the court, through the Beis Din, which declares the holidays. And that's the idea of Asher Tikru'u Osam, that you declare them. That's why it's interesting that when it comes to the prayers, the Shemona Esrei, for example, on Shabbos, we say, Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed art thou Hashem, Mekadesh HaShabbos, God who sanctifies the Shabbos. The sanctification of Shabbos is something which is unilaterally done by God. When it comes to the holidays, we say Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim. God sanctifies the Jewish people and the holidays, because it isn't directly done by God. It isn't God who sanctifies the holidays per se. It's the Jewish people who are sanctified by God. The Jewish people in turn declare the Rosh Chodeshim. They declare the beginnings of the months, and that in turn determines when the holidays fall. So the sanctity of the holidays is really dependent on the Kedusha, on the sanctity of the Jewish people. So here are the holidays, but the Parsha does begin with Shabbos. And it mentions that 6 days you work, and the 7th day it's Shabbos, which seems to be an anomaly. Because Shabbos is not one of the days which is Tikru'u Osam, we declare to be Mikra'ei Kodesh. And the Ramban explains over here that the reason Shabbos is inserted is not because this is one of the Mikra'ei Kodesh. Shabbos is inserted here to contrast the holidays to it, to show that in a very important way, Shabbos is different than the other holidays. And that difference is that on the holidays, not all forms of labor are prohibited. We know that on a holiday you're allowed to cook, for example, whereas on Shabbos, the prohibition of mulacha is absolute. So therefore, to bring out the unique characteristics of the holiday, the Torah introduces Shabbos first. But really, this parsha is not speaking about Shabbos. It's speaking about the holidays which are declared by the Bnei Yisrael. And the Torah goes through the holidays in some type of order. It begins with Pesach, and then ultimately goes on to Shavuos, and then Rosh Hashanah, then Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot. Now, obviously, the holiday we'd like to speak about is Shavuos, because that's the next holiday coming up. But to really fully understand what we're going to say about Shavuos, let's zero in on Sukkot a little bit. And before we do that, let's look at the overall structure of the parsha. In verse Dalet, once we put aside the introductory paragraph of Shabbos, it says, Eile Moadei Hashem Mikra'ei Kodesh. These are the appointed times, the holy days of assembly, Asher Tikru'u Osam B'Moadam, that you should declare in their proper times. And with regards to most of the holidays, Shavuos, we'll see, is a notable exception. The Torah tells us that on these holidays there's a prohibition of mulacha. You're not allowed to do various forms of work. And it says, Vayikra Ishel Hashem, and you shall bring a sacrifice to God. What is special about the holidays is these are occasions for sacrifice. These are occasions for offerings. The Ramban says that this is a reference to the Karban Musaf, which was the additional offering, was addition to the daily Karban HaTamid. The Ramban says that really it was not brought in the Midbar. And that's why the details of the sacrifices are only mentioned in the book of Midbar and Parshas Pinchas, when the Jews were at the threshold of entering Eretz Yisrael. But over here in the book of Vayikra, which was taught at the beginning of the 40 years, the Torah nevertheless mentions that these are days that are worthy of bringing sacrifices. So let's look at the Sukkos. Look at verse 33. He says, "Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Emor." God spoke to Moshe, and he said, "Daber al bnei Yisrael Emor, speak to bnei Yisrael, and tell them that b'chamisha asyom l'chodesh hashvi, on the 15th day of the 7th month, Chag HaSukkos Shivas Yomim Hashem." This is the holiday of Sukkos, 7 days for God. So, what do we do on Sukkos? B'yom Rishon Mikra Kodesh. On the first day is a day of holy assembly. Kol melechas avodah lo sasu. You cannot do any molacha, which is considered work. The Ramban explains that cooking is not considered work. That's not called melechas avoda. That's melechas hana. That is melacha that you do for pleasure, to be able to eat. As melechas avoda means the type of labor which is not to satisfy your own personal needs. Those are the types of things that are prohibited on Yom Tov. Then it says, Shivas Yomim Takrivu Ishel Hashem. For 7 days you shall offer sacrifices to God. B'Yom Hashmini, on the 8th day, Mikra Kodesh Yeh Lachem. Again, that is a holy day of assembly. That's Shemini Atzeres. V'Kraftem Ishel Hashem. And again you shall bring a burnt offering. Atzeresi. It is a Atzeres. Atzeres means a day that we are held back. The Rashi understands it this way, that it's the end of the holiday, really it's time to go home, and God keeps us for an extra day, so to speak, and that's why it's called Atzeres. Now that seems to conclude the laws of Sukkos. And now we have a closing verse which seems to wrap up the entire parsha. Eila Moadei Hashem. These, meaning the aforementioned, are the holidays of Hashem. Asher tikru'u asam mikrai kodesh, that you shall declare as holy days of assembly. Lahakriv ishel Hashem, to bring burnt offerings to the Lord. Olo mincha, the burnt offering of animals. Mincha, the flour offering. Zevach u'nesachim, the shlomim, which is partly eaten, and the wine libations. Dvar yom biyomo, each on its proper day. And this is, of course, Muvad, Shavsas Hashem. This is in addition to the Sabbath sacrifices. Muvad matnosechem, and this is aside from your voluntary gifts. Muvad called nidrechem, and aside from your pledged gifts. Muvad called nidvasechem, and aside from your donated gifts. Asher tidum Hashem, that you give unto the Lord. So the sacrifices that are brought on Sukkot and the other holidays, this is in addition to the sacrifices that come for Shabbos and sacrifices that are voluntary. So it would seem at that point that the parsha ends. That's it. We've summed up. We've concluded our discussion. We've gone through Pesach and Shavuos, and we've gone through Rosh Hashanah, we've gone through Yom Kippur, we've gone through Sukkot, and the Torah sums up and says that the aforementioned are the holidays of Hashem, on which we bring sacrifices in addition to the sacrifices that come for Shabbos and that are voluntary. And then in verse 39, it says, but, like an afterthought, but, B'chamisha asiyom l'chodesh hashvi, on the 15th day of the 7th month, ba'as b'chem es tfuas ha'aretz, when you gather the grain, the produce of Eretz Yisrael. In other words, when you go into Eretz Yisrael and you begin to harvest the produce. And of course, Sukkos is the time of the ingathering, because the way it worked at that time was that the grain was harvested in the beginning of the summer, late in the spring, but it was left in the fields to dry until just before the fall. In the end, it was gathered in. So, you shall celebrate the holiday for 7 days. Yom Rishon Shabboson, on the first day it should be a day of rest. Yom Hashmini Shabboson, on the 8th day, a day of rest. And then the Torah goes on to speak of the mitzvah of the Arba Minim, the 4 species. L'kachtem l'chem Yom Rishon, you shall take on the first day the fruit of the beautiful tree, which is the esrog, and the palm branch, and the myrtle, and the willow, and you shall rejoice before God for 7 days. And you shall celebrate it as a holiday for 7 days, and this is for eternity. It is to be practiced in the 7th month. But Sukkos teishu shivas yomim, you shall dwell on the Sukkos for 7 days, and this is in order that everyone should know that when God took us out of Egypt, we lived in Sukkos. And of course, Chazal tell us that those Sukkos were the enclosures that were made of the Anani Kabod, or the clouds of divine glory. And this is all an afterthought about Sukkos, and then the final verse, which really concludes the parsha, it says, "Vayidaber Moshe es Moshe Hashem b'nei Yisrael," that Moshe conveyed the instructions about the holidays to the Bnei Yisrael. Now, this is very, very unsatisfying. Now, this is the kind of thing that I would do. You know, I give a lecture, and then I sum it up, and it's over, wrapped it up with a ribbon, and I say, oh, but I forgot to mention something. You know, there's also another mitzvah. You know, a human being would do that type of thing. God, we expect more of. So the whole parsha is so odd. Because the Torah goes through all the holidays. We're going through Shabbos, we're going through Pesach, we go through Shavuos, we go through Rosh Hashanah, we go through Yom Kippur, we go through Sukkot. Then we have a verse that wraps it all up and says, these are the holidays of the Lord on which we bring sacrifices in addition to the Shabbos sacrifices and the voluntary sacrifices, but I forgot to mention something, that on Sukkot is also a mitzvah of taking the 4 species, the lulav, and there's also a mitzvah to live in the Sukkot, and that's in order people should remember that when he came out of Egypt, we lived in Sukkot, and then Moshe Rabbeinu goes and tells everyone what God said. So this is very strange. I mean, God is the author of everything. He should get it straight. There shouldn't be any afterthoughts. There shouldn't be something that he adds on, but. The answer to this question is a very simple one. The Ribono Shel Olam here is instructing the Bnei Yisrael as to how they are to observe the holidays in the Midbar, in the desert. Now, this parsha, Parshas Emor, is part of the Torah's Kehanim. It's part of the instruction that was given by God to Moshe Rabbeinu in the Mishkan, when the Mishkan was still at the encampment at Har Sinai, before the Jews began their travels through the Midbar, before it was decreed that they would have to wander for the remainder of 40 years. Now, this is all at the beginning. So presumably this instruction is instruction that was meant to be put into practice in the Midbar, in the desert. And the truth is that if you study the structure of the Chumashim overall, we know that the mitzvahs that are going to apply in Eretz Yisrael only are really reserved for Sefer Bamidbar, and more so for Sefer Devarim, which are the books that were taught later stages of the 40 years. The book of Vayikra really deals with mitzvahs that would be operative immediately. So if the laws of the holidays are here, then undoubtedly God is giving instructions as to the holidays are observed in the Midbar. And that's what the Rambam said. And that's why the Torah doesn't go into the details of the Karban Musaf, because the actual Karban Musaf, as described in Parshas Pinchas, was actually only brought in Eretz Yisrael. There's no point in mentioning it over here, because these are the directives that, for the most part, apply in the Midbar. So the Torah makes the point that it's a day which is fit, it's appropriate to bring sacrifices, but the Torah doesn't tell us exactly what the sacrifices are meant to be, because The actual Korbanos Musaf are only brought later. But the Parsha also, since we're talking about the holidays, also will supplement the immediately relevant laws by making reference to laws that would apply only in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore that's why it's an afterthought. In other words, the Parsha, the main thrust of the Parsha, which is to describe the observance of the holidays in the Midbar, is concluded. Ele Moedei Hashem, these are the holidays that are observed in the Midbar. But, and this is what the Pasuk says, but, on the 15th day of the 7th month, Ba'as bechem es tfuas ha'aretz, when you gather the produce of the land, which was not relevant to the Midbar, it means when you come into Eretz Yisrael and you gather the produce of the land, there are going to be additional observances for Sukkot, which are not going to be practiced in the Midbar. And these are specifically the mitzvah of the Arba Minim and the mitzvah of building Sukkot. Those are only going to apply after you come into Eretz Yisrael. Now, the reason for this is very, very simple. The mitzvah of Arba Minim, the Sefer HaChinuch says, the idea of taking plants, the myrtle and the willow and the palm and the esrog, this really is a celebration of the harvest. And this was a common practice, that when people wanted to celebrate the bounty of the harvest, they would take various plants and they would wave them. It's a celebration of the bounty of the harvest. So that mitzvah is ba'as bechem es tfuas ha'aretz. That's when you gather the produce of the land. In the Midbar, in the desert, there was no plowing, no planting, no harvesting, no ingathering. People lived on Mon. That's what they lived on. They lived on the Mon, which came down from heaven. So the mitzvah of the Arba Minim was not practiced. And that's not just for the practical consideration, where are they going to get these things in the desert? You know, where there's a will, there's a way. I'm sure they could have found some enterprising entrepreneur who will have imported, esrogim and lulav from somewhere else. But the mitzvah wasn't relevant in the Midbar, because these were observances which began with ba'as bechem es tfuas ha'aretz, when you gather the produce. The mitzvah of Sukkah especially is not relevant in the Midbar, because what is the purpose of the mitzvah of Sukkah? It's to commemorate that which took place in the Midbar, that we lived in enclosures of the Ananei Kavod, the clouds of divine glory. So what is the point of making a commemoration for something that we are doing at the current time? The whole point of a commemoration is only when you're no longer doing it. As long as you're still doing it, there's no commemoration of it. So therefore that too also will be only relevant when you get into Eretz Yisrael. When you get into Eretz Yisrael, you no longer will be living in the clouds of glory. So now there's a mitzvah to build sukkahs, which somehow remind us of the Ananei Kavod. But as long as you're in the Midbar living in the Ananei Kavod, there's no point in making a commemoration. Now the interesting thing is that it's still called Chag HaSukkos, because that's what the verse said. The verse said that even in the Midbar, on the 15th day of the 7th month, you'll observe Chag HaSukkos. It was a holiday to celebrate the Sukkos, but not to commemorate the Sukkos, which is a big difference. You can celebrate something even as you're living through it, right? You commemorate it only when it's over. So it was an amazing thing. It was a Sukkos without Sukkos. Or, put it better, it was a Sukkos with the real Sukkos, right? With the Ananei Kavod. So there was a celebration. And that's an interesting thing. It's a refutation to what I believe is one of the idiotic things that people like to say, which is that Jews don't believe in practicing Mother's Day or Father's Day, because we believe you should honor your parents every day of the year. Now, which is a fairly idiotic thing, because there are many things that we do every day of the year, yet we have special days to commemorate them. We mentioned the TCS Mitzrayim every day of the year, and yet we still have Pesach, a single day where we make a bigger deal of it. So the fact that, yes, we honor our parents every day of the year doesn't mean that there'd be something objectionable to having a single day for honoring parents. But the idea is that, to the contrary, even things that are daily sometimes require us to step back and have a special occasion to think about them. So when it comes to the Sukkos as well, the Jews during the 40 years were living in Sukkos. But once a year there had to be a week of Chag HaSukkos. There had to be a holiday to reflect on it, to think about it, to appreciate it, to thank God for it, despite the fact that they were living in Sukkos the entire year. So in the Midbar it was Chag HaSukkos, but there was no need to build Sukkos. You could have a Chag HaSukkos without building Home Depot-based Sukkos. You only need Home Depot after we've gone into Eretz Israel. What did they do then before Home Depot? I don't know the answer to that question. Should they have to improvise? But this is the idea, and that's why that parsha is an afterthought. It's an afterthought. Whereas really the parsha is concluded, because the main thrust of this parsha is to discuss how the holidays were observed in the Midbar. But having concluded the parsha, God chooses to supplement the parsha by telling us, but when you get into Eretz Israel, Sukkot is going to be enhanced. There are going to be additional observances associated with Sukkot, the mitzvah of Lulav and the mitzvah of Sukkah, which are not going to be applicable in the Midbar. So in the Midbar there's a Chag HaSukkos, you don't do work and you bring sacrifices, but the mitzvah of Lulav and the mitzvah of Sukkah, those are going to come only later. This is the reason why this section is not included within the earlier section, rather it's added as an afterthought. It's really a supplement to the parsha, whose main theme, main thrust is the observance of the holidays in the Midbar. Now, that's just an interesting thing. It's just an interesting thing that Sukkot really acquired new observances when the Jews came into Eretz Israel. It was observed one way in the Midbar, and it acquired new observances in Eretz Israel, as opposed to Rosh Hashanah, for example. When it comes to Rosh Hashanah in the Midbar was observed the exact same way as it was observed in Eretz Israel. The Torah says that Zichron Trua, it's a day of remembrance, which is aroused by the sounding of the shofar. So the mitzvah of shofar was practiced in the Midbar and in Eretz Israel likewise. So there's no supplemental information to have about Rosh Hashanah. As well, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, it says, what do you do on Yom Kippur? You fast. So in the same way that we fast in Eretz Israel, they fasted in the Midbar. So again, there's nothing added to Yom Kippur. Whatever Yom Kippur is today, Yom Kippur was then. But Sukkot underwent a transformation. And that's why we have two sections of Sukkot. Sukkot in the Midbar, and which really brings the parsha to its conclusion, and as an afterthought, but we also have the additional observances of Sukkot when we come into Eretz Yisrael. Now that is all of very technical interest. No, I don't know if there's anything particularly inspiring in this, but when it comes to Shavuos, we're going to find an amazing thing. That it seems, if you read the parasha carefully, you come to an amazing conclusion that Shavuos was not practiced in the Midbar at all. That as long as the Jews were in the Midbar, they did not practice Shavuos. Shavuos only began after the Jews came into Eretz Israel. And when we understand this, we'll really have a tremendous insight about the nature of Shavuos. But let's first see how it emerges from the parsha this way. So go back to the beginning of the parsha, and you'll see that verses 4 through 8 talk about Pesach. Verses 4 through 8 in this chapter talk about Pesach. And then in verse 9, we have something which again does not seem to relate to the holidays per se. It says, and he said, speak to the Bnei Yisrael and tell them that when you come into Eretz Yisrael, again, this is not in the Midbar, this is in Eretz Yisrael, and you harvest its harvest, you shall bring an omer, it's a certain measure, of the first harvest to the Kohen. Now, of course, this is something that every farmer would know right away. That which is the first grain to be harvested? Of course, it's the barley before the wheat. Because we all know that the barley ripens faster than the wheat, right? We all know that, right? all us farmers know that. But that's the fact. That the barley ripens earlier than the wheat. So therefore, if the Torah says you bring an omer, a measure of rashis katzirchim of your first harvest, that is a reference to barley. And it says that on that day, you bring a sheep along with that omer, and this is the carbon ha-omer. Now, exactly when do you bring this? When do you bring this? So Chazal have a Kabbalah, Chazal have a tradition, that this is brought on the second day of Pesach. And that's why it's written just at this point. So the first day of Pesach, of course, is Yom Tov. That's the celebration of the TCS Mitzrayim. The second day of Pesach nowadays, well, for us in Golus, the second day of Pesach really is a redo of the first day of Pesach. But in Eretz Yisrael, where things are as they should be, the second day of Pesach is Chol HaMoed. Right? It's a day before going on a trip. But when we had the Beis Hamikdash, it was the day of the carbon ha-omer. There was a carbon brought of the new barley. And then the Torah says, in verse 15, Usfartum lochem mimachros ha-Shabbos, you shall count from the day after Shabbos, and in this context, according to Chazal, Shabbos means the first day of Pesach. You should count from the day after the first day of Pesach. From the day that you bring the carbon ha-omer, you should count for 7 weeks. And that's, of course, the Sfira Soimer, which we are in the middle of. I'm not going to tell you what night it is tonight. I didn't count yet, but it's there. That's the number. You can see it on the sign. And that's what we do, we count. And then the Torah says that on the 50th day, you bring a mincha chadasha, a new offering. And this, of course, is the famous shtei halechem, the 2 loaves that come from the new wheat. And what's interesting about the shtei halechem is that they are chametz. They are leavened. Because as a rule, every time you bring a grain offering in the temple, it is unleavened. It is matzah. There are only 2 occasions that you bring chametz. One is the carbon toda, when a person brings a Thanksgiving offering. So it's brought along with bread, and some of the bread is chametz, and the other exception is the shtei ha-lechem. And this leads the Ramban to the conclusion that the shtei ha-lechem is a Thanksgiving offering. It's a Thanksgiving offering for the harvest, that Baruch Hashem, the harvest of wheat. And wheat, of course, is a staple. Barley was considered animal food. But wheat was considered human food, so it's the staple of the diet. So the harvest has come to its conclusion. So we give a sacrifice of Thanksgiving. That is the shtei ha-lechem. And that's on the 50th day. And the pasuk says, Ukrosem, you shall declare, this is verse 21, on that very day, Mikra Kodesh Yelochem, it shall be a day of holy assembly and not do any labor. And the Torah ends with a law about the harvest. When you do the harvest, don't harvest the entire field. Leave a corner of the field, the end of the field, for the poor. And then in verse 23, we go on to Rosh Hashanah, and then Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot. So the entire observance of Shavuos is only mentioned in the context of the carbon of the shtei halechem, which obviously is only going to apply when you come into Eretz Yisrael, because that's how the parsha began. When you come into Eretz Yisrael, so on the second day of Pesach, you're going to bring the carbon ha-omer of the new barley. You're going to count 50 days, and then you're going to bring the shtei halechem of the new wheat, and that day, which is the 50th day, you shall declare as a holy Mikra Kodesh, and that, of course, is the holiday of Shavuos. So there's no other reference to Shavuos. Shavuos is only mentioned with connection to the shtei halechem. That's it. To this offering, which was brought in Eretz Yisrael. So we're led to the seemingly inescapable conclusion that in the Midbar, they had Pesach, and they had Rosh Hashanah, and they had Yom Kippur, and they had half of Sukkot. They had Sukkot without the Lulav, and Sukkot without the Sukkot, but they had the holiday of Sukkot. But Shavuos they didn't have, because Shavuos is a holiday for the bringing of the new wheat. And since that was only practiced in Eretz Yisrael, so in the Midbar there was no Shavuos. That seems to be the conclusion that we come to in the Parsha. That the mitzvah to observe Shavuos only began with the entry to Eretz Yisrael. So in the Midbar, they observed Pesach, they observed Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, a truncated form of Sukkot, but no Shavuos. When they came into Eretz Yisrael, so then on the second day of Pesach, you had the new barley, the carbon omer. They counted from the carbon omer to the shtei halechem, and then on the day of the bringing of the shtei halechem, that day was declared as the holiday, and that of course is the holiday of Shavuos. So we're led to an amazing, seemingly inescapable conclusion that Shavuos was not observed in the Midbar. And the question is this: to us, when we think of Shavuos, what is Shavuos? What is the holiday of Shavuos? Shavuos is Man Matan Torah Seinu. This is the holiday which celebrates the giving of the Torah. And the evidence for that is the fact that that's the wording of the prayer that we say on Shavuos. When we say the Shemona Esrei on Shavuos, we say, Vatitam lanu Hashem Elokeinu b'Yahava, you gave us with love. Es Yom Chag HaShavuos Hazeh, this day of the holiday of Shavuos, Zman Matan Torah Seinu, the day of the giving of the Torah. So that is the wording which Chazal ordained for the prayer of Shavuos. That phrase, presumably, sums it all up. That's what Shavuos is. Shavuos is not Torah Seinu. It's the day that we're given the Torah, and that's what we're celebrating. In the Torah, there is no explicit mention of this fact, that the Torah was given on Shavuos. We figure it out by reconstructing the biblical chronology. If you go back to Parshas Yisro and you make a cheshbon that the Jews came to Har Sinai on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and we talk about the number of times that Moshe got up in the morning and did this and did this and did this, and the number of days that they were preparing for Matan Torah, we come to the conclusion that the Torah was given either on the 6th or the 7th of Sivan, which may correspond to Shavuos. Now this is a little funny. You see, remember, the calendar was not always fixed. It was based on the declaration of the court, based on the observation of the new moon. So the Gemara says that sometimes the month of Nisan could have 29 or 30 days. Likewise, the month of Iyar could also have 29 or 30 days. Now, if you're counting 50 days, or 49 days, I should say, from the second day of Pesach, when will the 50th day be? So the Gemara says, Shneihem Meleim, in a year where both Nisan and Iyar were full months, meaning of 30 days each, then the 50th day would be the 5th of Sivan. Shneihem Chaserim, if both Nisan and Iyar were defective months of 29 days, then the 50th day would be the 7th of Sivan. Echad Malay v'Echad Chaser, if one was a full month and one was a deficient month, if one had 30 and one had 29, then the 50th day would be the 6th of Sivan. Now in our calendar, now we have a calendar, it works out that way, because Chodesh Nisan is always a Chodesh Malay. It's always 30 days. That's why Rosh Chodesh Iyar is always 2 days. Chodesh Iyar is always a Chodesh Chaser. It's always a 29-day month, and that's why Rosh Chodesh Sivan is only 1 day. And therefore, it's Echad Malay v'Echad Chaser. The 50th day is always the 6th of Sivan. But sometimes it really could fall out, if you go back to the original system, sometimes on the 5th, sometimes on the 7th. When was the Torah given? So sure enough, it's a machlokes, it's a dispute in the Gemara. If you try to work out the chronology, according to the Rabbanan, it was given on the 6th of Sivan. According to Rabbi Yosei, it was given on the 7th of Sivan. And the Shavuos could sometimes be on the 6th, sometimes on the 7th, sometimes it misses, it falls out on the 5th. But somehow Shavuos is around the time of Matan Torah, and Chazal picked up on that, and they said in the Shemona Esrei, we refer to Shavuos as Man Matan Torah, saying, even though it's not technically accurate. Because there were some years that Shavuos fell out on the 5th, in which case, it was not on the day of Matan Torah. And our Shavuos falls on the 6th, and Rabbi Yossi holds it was the 7th, and it doesn't work out either. But it's approximately, it's Be'era, it's approximately the time of Matan Torah. But to us it seems that's the main thing of Shavuos. That's when we talk about Shavuos. Go to shul on Shavuos, and I'll bet you dollars for donuts that the rabbi's sermon is going to talk about the giving of the Torah. I promise you. And this is not because I'm a prophet and I have Ruach HaKodesh. I'm just telling you. You'll go to shul on Shavuos, the rabbi is going to talk about the Torah. Right? Because that's what we talk about on Shavuos, the giving of the Torah. And yet the Torah never makes this point explicitly. But tonight, the stakes are raised even further. It's not just the Torah doesn't make the point explicitly. It seems from the Torah that it has nothing to do with the Torah, because if it had anything to do with the Torah, there's no reason it should not have been observed in the desert. In other words, if Shavuos is a holiday, which is a harvest holiday, and it relates to the agricultural cycle, now we understand. That's why it didn't apply in the Midbar. In the Midbar, they weren't plowing, planting, harvesting. They were only eating Mon. So therefore, Shavuos only becomes relevant when you come into Eretz Yisrael. As opposed to Pesach and Sukkot, which are historical commemorations. So therefore, Pesach can apply even in the Midbar. It commemorates the TCS Mitzrayim. Sukkot is a little bit odd, because it can't be a commemoration. We still have the sukkahs. So you have the truncated sukkahs, you have the sukkahs without the sukkahs. In other words, you reflect on the sukkahs. You thank God for the sukkahs, but you don't build sukkahs, because there's no point in building sukkahs if you're living in sukkahs. And the aspect of sukkahs which is related to the harvest, which is the Arba Minim, you taka don't do until you come into Eretz Yisrael. And Shavuos you don't do at all. Because the entire significance of Shavuos is its association with the harvest, and therefore it only becomes relevant when you come into Eretz Yisrael. So it's not just that the Torah doesn't explicitly make the connection to Torah. It seems that the Torah tells us to the contrary, that Shavuos has nothing to do with the Torah. And that's why Shavuos only begins when we enter Eretz Yisrael and we have harvests. So there really are two questions. Number one, that if, from the Torah's perspective, there's nothing to do with the Torah, like, why did Chazal, in a sense, turn the whole thing around? And to the extent that the Shavuos almost exclusively is thought of as being related to Matan Torah. But even more seriously, why isn't there a holiday for Matan Torah? It's a funny thing. If Shavuos is a harvest celebration, why is there no holiday to celebrate the giving of the Torah? We celebrate the TCS Mitzrayim. We celebrate the fact that we lived in Sukkot for 40 years. Why don't we celebrate the fact that God gave us the Torah? This is the question. I'd like to propose a possibility, and this is something which we really have to think about for a moment. Now, Baruch Hashem, we are Jews who are committed Jews, and we observe Torah, and we study Torah, and we love the Torah, and we feel that the Torah gives meaning to our lives. And where would we be without it? There's a famous Gemara. The Gemara says that the sage of Yosef said, he told his servants that make for me, on the holiday of Shavuos, an egla tulsa, a third calf. That was considered the choice calf, the third born to its mother, on Shavuos, because Ilav Hayayim, if not for this day of Shavuos, Kama Yosi Kibeshuka, how many Joes would there be in the street? It was Yosef. This Kama Yosi Kibeshuka, how many Joes would be in the street? Joe Biden, how many Joes would there be? So, this is a special day. This is what I am. Whatever I am is because of this day. I think to a certain extent we all feel that. We all feel, as committed Jews, that if not for the day of Shavuos, we'd be nowhere. This is everything to us. I think that anybody who thinks about it seriously understands that Shavuos is more meaningful than any other holiday. It's more than Pesach, and it's more than Sukkot, and it's more than Rosh Hashanah. This is everything. whatever we are as Jews comes from the Torah. When do we get the Torah? Shavuos. So our Rosh Hashanah wouldn't be a Rosh Hashanah without Shavuos, and our Yom Kippur wouldn't be Yom Kippur without Shavuos, and our Pesach wouldn't be Pesach without Shavuos, and our Sukkot wouldn't be Sukkot without Shavuos, and nothing would be anything without Shavuos. So Shavuos is really everything. It's really everything. Everything is rooted in Shavuos. We all feel that. Except the truth is, that is something that cannot be imposed on someone. It is something that you have to come to on your own. Now, let's think about this. If God comes to the Jewish people and says, okay, listen, I have plans for you. I'm going to give you a body of law that you're meant to live by. It's going to govern every aspect of your lives. It's going to determine what you can eat, what you can do, the clothes you can wear, what you can say, what you can think. You know, there are mitzvahs related to what we're allowed to think. It'll determine how you spend your time. You know, a big chunk of time is going to be snatched from you. 1/7 of the week is Shabbos, which has its myriad of restrictions. Laws of keeping kosher, laws of family purity. I mean, it's going to govern everything you do, and you're going to love it. Not only are you going to love it, you're going to celebrate it. You're going to, once a year, dance and rejoice and be happy because I imposed this on you. You think it's outlandish. Can't be such a thing. The joy of Torah, the joy of having a Torah, living by a Torah, can only be something which is not imposed on us. It can't be something that God says, I'm giving it to you, I'm demanding it of you, and you're going to celebrate it, and you're going to enjoy it. That's like, you know, your father comes to you and says, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and you're going to do this, and if you don't do that, I'm going to punish you, and you're going to enjoy it. And the thing goes, if the morale doesn't improve, beatings will begin. As if that's going to help. It can't be. It can't be. The Ribono Shel Olam never makes such a demand of us. So he gives us the Torah, he never tells us we have to celebrate it. Yeah, there's a holiday called Shavuos. To celebrate what? To celebrate the harvest, the bounty of the harvest. That's something that we appreciate. We all want to eat. You know, keep in mind, we are far removed from the family farm. But in reality, everything depends on the harvest. That's our sustenance, that's our livelihood. So if it's a bountiful harvest, then we have. If there's a meager harvest, then it's a year of deprivation. So when the harvest comes, and Baruch Hashem, there's bounty, that's something that we can celebrate, that we understand. God can ask that of us. He says that when I bless you with bounty and abundance, it's important you should celebrate that and express your gratitude. That people understand. Talk about TCS Mitzrayim. I understand that too. Right? We were redeemed from Egypt. You know, we should celebrate that. That makes perfect sense. We traveled through the Midbar 40 years, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu protected us. He enveloped us in the Inyan HaKavod, protected us from the elements, from the sun, from the cold. We understand that. Right? We're the beneficiaries of God's kindnesses. We should express our gratitude. We should celebrate that. But to celebrate the fact that we have the laws, says that is something that cannot be expected of a human being. God would never tell a person, these are the laws and you're going to celebrate them. That's what we do. We've transformed Shavuos. In other words, we observe Shavuos. Shavuos, as God commanded it, is a harvest festival. But we picked up the fact, you know, it seems, if you work out the chronology, it just about seems to come out at the same time the Torah was given. For us, the Torah is everything. Because we've lived it, we've experienced it, and we've come to feel that it is the sum total of everything that we value in life. We have taken Shavuos and we've transformed Shavuos into what it is. Now, the amazing thing about Shavuos is that the Shavuos that we observe, which is a Shavuos which is Zman Matan Toraseinu, is invention of the Jewish people. Right? It's not Shavuos as God commanded us. Right? It's Shavuos as we reformulated Shavuos. We transformed Shavuos. Our love of Torah, appreciation for Torah, which came through our experience, led us to recreate Shavuos, the whole nusach, the whole theme of Shavuos. We've turned it into something new. But it's something that could not be imposed by God. It's something which only could be created by the genius and the appreciation and the love of the Jewish people. And that's why the Shavuos, as we observe it, is not in the Torah at all. Now let me illustrate this idea with a halacha. With a halacha. And you'll hear this halacha. It's a very bizarre halacha. But when you hear this idea, you'll understand it immediately. There are certain things in the Torah that one may not derive benefit from. That's called isurei hana. Things that you cannot derive benefit from. You're not allowed to eat them, use them. You can't sell them to generate money. That's called deriving benefit from it. It's called isurei hana. There are various types. There are certain things which the Torah itself prohibits. Right? Basar b'chalav, meat cooked with milk, is asur b'hana. Not only you're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to use it. You can't feed it to your dog. That's why it's very, very important. Very important that when if you have a dog, you buy dog food, you have to make sure that the dog food is not basar b'chalav. Because basar b'chalav is asur b'hana. You can't have benefit from it, you can't even feed it to an animal. Now the question is, so why doesn't the OU give a hechsher to dog food? Because it's very important to know that it doesn't have to be kosher. Because in the Vela, non-kosher meat is mutar b'hana. You can eat that to a dog. You can't eat it yourself, but you can feed it to your dog. So if you had non-kosher meat that was cooked with milk, so that would be permitted for a dog.
It would be?
It would be, yeah. Because excuse me, it was prohibited to a dog. In other words, but non-kosher meat without milk could be given to a dog. So now, so if the OU would give a hechsher to dog food, people would make a mistake and think that it's kosher for human consumption.
Oh, yeah.
It wouldn't have to be. It could be kosher for animal consumption, not being kosher for human consumption. So the OU would have to have a new symbol called OUD. OU dog. Right? But that's already used up for OU dairy, so couldn't do that. So anyway, so that's why it's a little complicated. But you have to look at the label and read the ingredients, know where you're getting at. Now that's one type of isur hana, something which the Torah forbids. There's another type of isur hana. For example, a person makes a vow, a person makes a neder. I'm not going to have any benefit from a thing, right? So that's also a form of isurei hana. The Gemara is a discussion. Those things that you can't derive benefit from, can you use them for a mitzvah? Can you use them for a mitzvah? Using them for a mitzvah, is that called deriving benefit from it? So the Gemara says in several places an amazing psak. It says that things that are asur b'hana, you're allowed to use for a mitzvah, because mitzvahs lav lehanais nitnu. Mitzvahs were not given for pleasure. Using an object for a mitzvah is not considered deriving pleasure from it. So just to illustrate an amazing thing, the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says that, let's say a person wants to immerse in a spring as a mikveh. He wants to use a spring as a mikveh. Is that considered deriving benefit from it? So the Gemara says it depends whether it's summer or winter. In the summer, so aside from the fact that you're doing a mitzvah with it, there's also the pleasure, you cool off on a hot day, so you're not allowed to. If a person made a vow, I'm not going to have benefit from the spring, you can't immerse in that spring as a mikveh in the summer. But in the winter, it's freezing cold outside, there's no pleasure, you're chilled to the bone, it's only that you're fulfilling a mitzvah. That's not called benefit, that's not called pleasure, because mitzvahs lav lehanais nitum. Mitzvahs weren't given for pleasure. Rashi says that mitzvahs were given as a yoke, as a burden. They weren't given as pleasure. Now, this is a little hard to understand. And open a Tehillim to Kuf Yud Tes, a very, very long kapitel, where there are 8 verses for every letter in the alphabet, which is essentially a 176-verse love song to the Torah. That's filled with David HaMelech saying again and again and again, in every which way, how much he loves the Torah and how beautiful it is, and how sweet it is, and how precious it is. And we all understand that's how a Jew is supposed to feel about the Torah. There's no greater pleasure than Torah, that is sweeter than honey. So how is it possible that using an object for a mitzvah is not considered getting pleasure? The answer is because the Gemara is discussing from God's end. When God said that you're not allowed to derive pleasure from an object, what type of pleasures was God referring to? So God is referring to the things that a human being would find naturally pleasurable. He wasn't referring to the things that a human being would not find naturally pleasurable, but would only be pleasurable because of some understanding he's come to through his experience. So of course, for us, when we learn this Gemara, it just seems bizarre. It doesn't make any sense. What, using an object for a mitzvah isn't called pleasure? What greater pleasure is there than doing a mitzvah? But from God's perspective, when God gave the Torah, he gave the Torah with an understanding that not everyone would find it that way. Not everyone would find it that pleasurable. Right? There are probably many people that will look at it as a pain in the neck. Right? So therefore, when God made the laws as to pleasures that are prohibited, he didn't include in that list the pleasure of using an object for a mitzvah. Now, getting back to the point I want to make is this, that sometimes we are very, very intolerant or impatient with people that don't see things the way we see them. You know, I speak to people all the time, who are grappling with issues with their children. You know, the parents have found religion, and they love the mitzvahs, and to them Shabbos is so beautiful, and Yom Tov is so beautiful, and this is so beautiful. They're on a spiritual high, and somehow their kids don't follow along. They don't follow along. They're not interested. And the parents are wondering, are the kids blind? Are they deaf? Are they dumb? What, don't they see what's in front of their eyes? What's going on? So the truth is that you should know that even the Ribono Shel Olam doesn't make that demand of us. When the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, this is the law, you have to observe it. It says, I don't demand of you to love it. I don't insist you love it. If you love it, then that's beautiful. Right? If you love it, then express your gratitude. Express your appreciation. But it's not necessarily something that God can ask of us. And that's why in God's book, mitzvahs lav lehanais nitno, using an object for a mitzvah is not considered a prohibited benefit. And that's why God does not demand of us to celebrate Shavuos as man matan teraseinu. In other words, God understands us better than we understand ourselves. He understands our limits, he understands our shortcomings, he understands our failings, but he understands our imperfections. And he gave the Torah with all that in mind. And therefore he said to make a categorical rule that everyone has to observe Shavuos as a wonderful holiday of joy. God said only in terms of the harvest, not in terms of Zman Matan Teraseinu, not in terms of giving the Torah. That is something that you have to come to experience. And sometimes maybe that has to be the attitude of our children as well. They listen, oh, this is the way it is. We have to do things whether we like them or we don't like them. That's what it means to be a responsible adult. It says, you do them, maybe, halavai, you should come to like them someday. Come to appreciate them. But this is something that we have to understand, and it's really, I think, an insight about the very nature of God's expectations of us. God has reasonable expectations. He is not unreasonable. Right? He asks us to do things, says he will not have a taina on us, he won't have a grievance if we don't find them particularly enjoyable, if we find them a little bit of a drudge. God understands us. Because God made us, he understands human beings' shortcomings, he understands their failings, he understands exactly how they're made up. We, through our learning, through our understanding, through our doing, through our commitment, bring ourselves to a point where we understand that which is hidden in Torah. And therefore, for us, we turn Shavuos into something which is totally new. How precious is that to the Rebbeinu Shalom? In other words, that it comes out our observance of Shavuos is something that God could not demand of us, could not necessarily expect of us, and yet we do it. And every Shavuos we all understand that this is all we have. Where would we be without it? Kama Yossi B'shuka, how many Joes would be in the street if not for this day? But it's not something that God says, this is what you have to say, this is what you have to do, this is, right? There'd be a legitimate Shavuos without any warm, fuzzy feelings about the Torah. This is something that the collective spirit of Klal Yisrael understood in Shavuos, and this is what we've turned Shavuos into. I think that's something that is worthy of reflection. Thank you for listening.